The soap burned Victoria's cracked knuckles as she pushed the brush across the saloon floor, watching brown water spread across wooden planks that would never truly be clean. She had been on her knees since dawn in the Silver Dollar Saloon in Mojave, California, her fourth hour of scrubbing away the filth of last night's revelry, and her back screamed with each movement. The year was 1883, and Victoria Barrett had been scrubbing floors for 3 years now, ever since her father died in a mining accident and left her with nothing but debts she could never repay. At 22 years old, her hands looked like they belonged to a woman twice her age, the skin permanently wrinkled and stained from lye soap and dirty water. Her dark hair hung limp around her face, and her dress, once a pretty blue calico, had faded to a dull gray from countless washings. "You missed a spot over there," the saloon owner, Mr. Henderson, called from behind the bar. He was counting his money from the night before, not even looking at her. Victoria bit back the sharp reply that rose to her lips. She needed this job. It paid 50 cents a day, barely enough to afford the tiny room she rented above the general store and the meager meals she allowed herself. But it was honest work, or at least as honest as anything got in Mojave, a dusty railroad town filled with miners, cowboys, and men looking to strike it rich in the silver mines. She dunked her brush back into the bucket and moved toward the spot Henderson had indicated. The door to the saloon swung open, letting in a blast of morning heat and dust. Victoria did not look up. She had learned long ago that making eye contact with the men who frequented the Silver Dollar only brought trouble. "We are closed," Henderson said sharply. "Come back at noon." "I am looking for work," a man's voice replied. It was deep and steady, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone from Texas or perhaps Oklahoma. "Heard you might need someone to deal with the trouble you have been having." Victoria kept scrubbing, but her ears perked up. Everyone in town knew about the troubles at the Silver Dollar. A gang had been coming around demanding protection money, and just last week they had smashed up half the furniture when Henderson tried to refuse. "What makes you think you can handle it?" Henderson asked, but there was interest in his voice now. "I have handled worse." Victoria could not help herself. She glanced up from her work and immediately wished she had not. The man standing just inside the doorway was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty shirt. He wore a gun belt slung low on his hips, and his face beneath his wide-brimmed hat was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, steel gray and sharp as they swept the room, taking in everything with the careful assessment of someone who had learned to spot danger before it spotted him. Those eyes landed on her for just a moment, and Victoria felt her cheeks burn. She ducked her head and returned to her scrubbing with renewed vigor. "The name is Thomas Walker," the man said. "I have done security work all through Nevada and Arizona. I keep things peaceful." "How much?" $2 a day plus a room." Henderson whistled low. "That is steep." "So is replacing all your furniture every week. So is losing customers because they are afraid to drink here." There was a long pause. Victoria scrubbed the same spot over and over, her heart pounding for reasons she could not quite name. She could feel Thomas Walker's presence like a physical weight in the room. "All right," Henderson finally said. "But if Carlson's gang shows up and you cannot handle them, you are out on your ear with no pay." "Fair enough." She heard the sound of the men shaking hands, then Henderson said, "There is a room in the back you can use. Nothing fancy, but it has got a bed and a window. You can start tonight." "I will start now," Thomas said. "If I am going to protect this place, I need to know everything about it. Every entrance, every weak point, everyone who comes and goes." Henderson grunted his approval, and Victoria heard their footsteps as the two men walked toward the back rooms. She let out a breath she had not known she was holding and sat back on her heels, her brush dripping soapy water onto the floor. Something had just changed. She could feel it in the air, like the electric tension before a summer storm. Thomas Walker had looked at her for only a second, but in that second, she had not seen the dismissal or contempt she was used to from men. She had seen something else, something that made her pulse quicken. She shook her head at her own foolishness. Men like Thomas Walker did not notice women like her. She was the scrub woman, invisible and insignificant, and that was how it would remain. She picked up her brush and returned to work, trying to ignore the strange flutter in her chest. Over the next week, Victoria became acutely aware of Thomas Walker's presence in the Silver Dollar. He was always there, a quiet, watchful figure who seemed to notice everything. He did not drink much, just nursed a single whiskey through the evening, his back always to the wall and his eyes on the door. The other men in town had noticed him too. Word had spread quickly that Henderson had hired a gunman, and the atmosphere in the saloon had changed. The usual rowdiness was more subdued, the arguments less heated. Even the working girls who entertained upstairs walked a little straighter and complained a little less. But Carlson's gang had not shown up yet, and Victoria could feel the tension building like a kettle about to boil over. She was scrubbing the floor on a Wednesday morning, the sun barely up, when she heard footsteps behind her. She had learned to recognize Thomas's walk, the confident stride of a man who knew exactly where he was going and what he was doing. "Morning, Miss Barrett," he said. Victoria nearly dropped her brush in surprise. In the week he had been at the Silver Dollar, Thomas had never spoken directly to her. She looked up, squinting against the morning light coming through the windows. "Morning, Mr. Walker," she managed, her voice rough from disuse. She did not talk much during her days. There was no one to talk to. He crouched down beside her, and she caught the scent of leather and soap. Up close, she could see the small scars that marked his face, the evidence of a hard life. But she also saw something else, a gentleness in his eyes that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "You do not have to call me Mr. Walker," he said. "Thomas is fine." "That would not be proper," Victoria said automatically, then felt foolish. What did propriety matter when she was on her knees scrubbing floors? "Proper is overrated," Thomas said, and she thought she detected the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "I have been watching you." Victoria's heart skipped. "Sir." "You work harder than any two men I have ever seen," he continued. "You are here before anyone else and you leave after everyone is gone, and Henderson treats you like dirt." "It is a job," Victoria said quietly, returning her attention to the floor. "I need the money." "What happened to your family, if you do not mind me asking?" Victoria hesitated. She did not talk about this. She did not talk about anything, really. But something about Thomas's steady presence made her want to speak. "My father died 3 years ago in a cave-in at the Esperanza mine. My mother passed when I was young. My father had debts, and when he died, they became mine. I have been working them off ever since." "How much do you still owe?" $200. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That is a lot of floor scrubbing." Despite herself, Victoria felt a bitter laugh escape her lips. Yes, it is. There are other ways to make money." Victoria's hand stilled on the brush. She had heard that before from men who looked at her with calculating eyes. The implication was always clear. "I am not that desperate," she said coldly. "That is not what I meant," Thomas said quickly. "I meant honest work, better work than this. There is no other work in Mojave for a woman alone, not work that pays enough to live on and pay down debt. Believe me, I have looked." Thomas stood up, and Victoria felt oddly bereft at the loss of his closeness. "Well," he said, his voice thoughtful, "maybe that is about to change." Before Victoria could ask what he meant, Henderson came through from the back, already shouting about tables that needed wiping and glasses that needed washing. Thomas moved away, taking up his usual position by the bar, and Victoria returned to her scrubbing, her mind churning with questions. That night, Carlson's gang finally showed up. Victoria was finishing her work for the day, wringing out her rags and emptying her buckets in the alley behind the saloon, when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats. 5 riders came down the main street, moving fast and raising clouds of dust. They pulled up in front of the Silver Dollar with shouts, and the screech of horses being reined in too hard. She recognized Jake Carlson immediately. Everyone in Mojave knew him, a big man with a red beard and mean eyes who ran most of the criminal activity between here and Barstow. The 4 men with him were equally rough-looking, all armed with revolvers and rifles. Victoria's first instinct was to slip back inside and warn Thomas, but she was frozen in the alley, her empty buckets at her feet. "Henderson," Carlson bellowed as he swung down from his horse. "Get out here." Through the window, Victoria could see the saloon's interior. A few early customers were scattered at tables, and Henderson was behind the bar. Thomas sat at his usual spot, apparently unconcerned, though Victoria noticed his hand had moved closer to his gun. Carlson shoved through the doors, his men following. Victoria crept closer to the window, her heart pounding. "You got my message last week," Carlson said, his voice carrying easily. "I thought I made myself clear about the payment." "I made a different arrangement," Henderson said, trying to sound brave but his voice shaking slightly. "Different arrangement," Carlson laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "What kind of arrangement? The kind where you take your business elsewhere," Thomas said from his seat. He still had not looked directly at Carlson, apparently more interested in his whiskey. The saloon went dead quiet. Carlson turned slowly, his hand moving to his gun. "And who the hell are you?" "Someone who is tired of men like you thinking they can push decent folks around," Thomas said. Now he did look up, and his gray eyes were cold as winter steel. "Time for you to leave." "There are 5 of us and one of you," Carlson said. "You sure you want to play this hand? I am sure you do not want to find out what happens if you do not walk out that door right now." Victoria held her breath. This was insane. Thomas was fast, she could tell that just from the way he moved, but 5 against 1 was suicide. But Thomas did not seem concerned. He stood up slowly, his hand hovering near his gun, and something in his posture made Carlson's men nervous. She could see it in the way they shifted, in the way their eyes darted to each other. "Last chance," Thomas said softly. Carlson's face turned purple with rage. "Kill him," he snarled at his men. Everything happened at once. Carlson went for his gun, and Thomas moved faster than Victoria would have thought possible. His revolver cleared leather like lightning, and the crack of gunfire split the air. Carlson screamed and grabbed his hand, his gun clattering to the floor. Thomas had shot the weapon right out of his grip. Before Carlson's men could react, Thomas had his gun trained on them, his aim steady. "Your boss still has his hand," he said conversationally. "The next one of you who moves will not be so lucky. Now all of you, very slowly, take out your guns with 2 fingers and drop them on the floor." The men hesitated, looking to Carlson, who was cradling his bloody hand and cursing. "Do it," Carlson gasped. One by one, the men disarmed themselves. Thomas moved forward, kicking the guns away, never taking his aim off them. "Now get out," he said, "and do not come back. If I see any of you in this saloon again, I will not be aiming for your hands." Carlson glared at him with pure hatred, but he stumbled toward the door, his men following. They mounted their horses and rode off into the gathering darkness, their shouts of anger fading into the distance. The saloon erupted in cheers. Henderson was grinning from ear to ear, and the customers were clapping Thomas on the back. But Thomas just holstered his gun and sat back down, picking up his whiskey as if nothing had happened. Victoria realized she was shaking. She leaned against the wall of the alley, trying to calm her racing heart. She had just witnessed something extraordinary. Thomas had faced down 5 armed men without breaking a sweat, and he had done it without killing anyone. She gathered her buckets and slipped inside through the back door, heading for the small closet where she kept her cleaning supplies. But before she could reach it, Thomas appeared in the hallway. "You saw all that," he said. It was not a question. Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. "Are you all right? I should be asking you that question," Thomas shrugged. "I have been in worse situations." "I believe you." Victoria set down her buckets and studied him. "You could have been killed, but I was not. You are a fool." The words were out before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted her boldness. But Thomas just laughed, a real laugh this time, warm and genuine. "Probably," he agreed, "but it worked out." They stood there in the dim hallway, looking at each other, and Victoria felt that strange flutter in her chest again. Thomas took a step closer, and she could see the adrenaline still in his eyes, the flush of action on his face. "Victoria," he said, and hearing her name on his lips did something to her. "You should not be scrubbing floors. We have established that I do not have much choice. What if you did?" "What are you talking about?" Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He placed it in her hand, and she felt the weight of coins inside. "What is this?" $200. "Payment for your father's debts." Victoria stared at the pouch, then at Thomas, then back at the pouch. "I cannot accept this." "Yes, you can." "No, I cannot. This is charity." "It is not charity. It is an investment." "An investment in what?" Thomas met her eyes. "In you. In your future. In making sure you never have to scrub another floor unless you want to." Tears stung Victoria's eyes, and she angrily blinked them back. "Why would you do this?" "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Thomas said quietly. "I know you are strong and hard-working and that you deserve better than this. I know that when I look at you, I see someone special, someone worth taking a chance on." "You are talking nonsense," Victoria whispered, but she did not let go of the pouch. "Maybe. But tomorrow morning, I want you to take that money to whoever holds your father's debts and pay them off. And then I want you to decide what you want to do with your life. Not what you have to do, but what you want to do. I do not understand why you are doing this." Thomas reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. The touch sent shivers down her spine. "Because," he said, "from the moment I walked into this saloon and saw you on your knees scrubbing that floor, I knew I was going to make sure you never had to scrub again." Victoria could not speak. She clutched the pouch to her chest, feeling the weight of it, the impossible gift of it. No one had ever done anything like this for her. No one had ever seen her as anything more than the scrub woman. "Think about it," Thomas said. "And tomorrow, we will talk about what comes next." He turned and walked away, leaving Victoria standing in the hallway with $200 in her hand, and her whole world turned upside down. She did not sleep that night. She lay in her tiny room above the general store, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened. The money sat on the small table beside her bed, real and tangible and terrifying. What if this was some kind of trick? What if Thomas expected something from her in return? But even as the thought crossed her mind, she dismissed it. She had seen enough of him over the past week to know that he was not that kind of man. He was rough and dangerous when he needed to be, but there was an honor to him, a code he lived by. He had said he saw something special in her. The words played over and over in her mind. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. She had spent the last 3 years feeling invisible, less than human, just a pair of hands that scrubbed floors. But Thomas had seen her. Really seen her. As dawn broke, Victoria made her decision. She dressed in her least faded dress, pinned up her hair as neatly as she could, and took the money to the office of Mr. Jameson, the man who held her father's debts. Jameson was a thin, sour man who ran the assay office and held notes on half the town. He looked surprised when Victoria walked in, even more surprised when she emptied the pouch onto his desk. "I am here to pay off my father's debt," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. Jameson counted the money slowly, his lips moving. Finally, he looked up. "This is the full amount plus interest. Then we are square. We are square." He opened a ledger and made a notation, then pulled out a piece of paper and wrote on it, "Here is your receipt. Richard Barrett's debt is paid in full." Victoria took the paper with trembling hands. It was done. For the first time in 3 years, she was free. She walked out of the assay office into the bright morning sun, blinking back tears. The main street of Mojave stretched before her, dusty and unpromising as always, but somehow it looked different now, full of possibility. She went to the Silver Dollar, not sure what she was going to say to Thomas, only knowing that she needed to see him. But when she arrived, Henderson told her that Thomas had ridden out at dawn. "Said he had business in Barstow," Henderson said. "Should be back tomorrow." Victoria felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. She had wanted to thank him, to talk to him, to figure out what happened next. But maybe it was better this way. It gave her time to think. "You want your job back?" Henderson asked, eyeing her. Victoria looked at the floor she had scrubbed so many times, at the buckets and brushes waiting in the corner. Something hardened in her chest. "No," she said. "No, I do not." Henderson's eyebrows shot up. "You quitting?" "I am quitting." She walked out before he could respond, feeling lighter than she had in years. She did not know what she was going to do, did not know how she would eat or pay her rent. But for the first time since her father died, she felt like herself again, like a person with choices. She spent the day walking around Mojave, really looking at it for the first time in a long while. The town had grown since she had arrived. There were new shops, a new hotel going up at the end of the main street. She passed the general store and saw a sign in the window that said they were looking for help on impulse. She went inside. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was a Chinese woman who had come to California during the gold rush and stayed to open a business. She was known for being fair but tough. "I saw your sign," Victoria said, "about needing help." Mrs. Chen looked her up and down. "You are the girl who scrubs floors at the Silver Dollar. I quit this morning." "Why?" Victoria hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Because I realized I deserve better, Mrs." Chen's weathered face broke into a smile. "Good answer. You know how to work a till. I can learn. You know how to deal with difficult customers. I have been on my knees scrubbing floors while drunk men insulted me for 3 years. I think I can handle difficult customers, Mrs." Chen laughed, a sharp bark of amusement. "I like you. $1 a day plus you can have the small room in back. It is not much, but it is better than over the saloon." Victoria felt tears threatening again. "When do I start?" "Now, take off that coat and get behind the counter. I will teach you the inventory." And just like that, Victoria had a new job and a new home. She spent the rest of the day learning the stock, memorizing prices, and dealing with customers. It was harder than scrubbing floors in some ways, requiring her to think and talk and smile even when she did not feel like it. But it was also infinitely better. That night, she moved her few possessions into the room behind the general store. It was small, barely bigger than a closet, but it had a real bed with a clean mattress and a window that looked out onto the side street. Mrs. Chen even threw in a wash basin and a mirror. Victoria looked at herself in the mirror, really looked, for the first time in months. Her face was thinner than it used to be, her cheekbones sharp. But her eyes, which had been dull and lifeless for so long, had a spark in them now. Thomas had done this. He had given her back her life. The next day dragged by. Victoria found herself watching the street through the store's front window, looking for a tall figure on a horse. But Thomas did not appear, or the day after that. By the third day, Victoria was beginning to worry. What if something had happened to him? What if Carlson's gang had caught up with him on the road? The thought made her stomach clench with fear. On the fourth day, Henderson came into the store to buy tobacco. "Have you heard from Walker?" Victoria asked, trying to sound casual. Henderson shook his head. "Not a word." "Starting to think he is not coming back." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Not coming back. But why would he leave? Had helping her been his way of saying goodbye? Did he say anything before he left? She pressed. Just that he had business in Barstow. Figured he would be gone a day or two, not near a week. Victoria's worry deepened. Something was wrong. She could feel it. That night she lay awake in her new room, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Thomas. She barely knew him, had spoken to him only a handful of times. But he had changed her life completely, had seen something in her that no one else had. And now he was gone. She must have finally fallen asleep, because she was jerked awake by the sound of shouting in the street. It was still dark, maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. She stumbled out of bed and looked out the window. A lone rider was coming down the main street, moving slowly. Even in the darkness, Victoria recognized Thomas's silhouette. But something was wrong. He was slumped in the saddle, barely holding on. She grabbed her shawl and ran outside. By the time she reached him, Thomas was sliding off his horse. She caught him, or tried to, and they both ended up on the ground. That was when she saw the blood, dark and wet, on his shirt. "Thomas!" She pressed her hands against his chest, trying to staunch the bleeding. "What happened?" "Who did this?" "Carlson," Thomas rasped. His face was pale, his skin clammy with sweat. "Ambushed me outside Barstow, got away but took a bullet in the shoulder. We need to get you to the doctor." "No doctor. Town doc drinks too much. Do not trust him." "Then what do I do?" Thomas's eyes focused on her face with difficulty. "You knew I needed to get back to you." The words should have thrilled her, but she was too terrified. He was losing blood and she did not know how to help him. Mrs. Chen appeared beside them, wrapped in a robe. She took one look at Thomas and said, "Get him inside. I have some medical training." Between the two of them, they managed to get Thomas into the store and onto Victoria's bed. Mrs. Chen sent Victoria for water and clean cloths, then shooed her out while she examined the wound. Victoria paced in the main room of the store, her hands shaking, Thomas's blood drying on her dress. She had never been so frightened in her life. If he died because he had helped her and Carlson had come after him for revenge. Mrs. Chen emerged after what felt like hours. "The bullet went through clean," she said. "I have stitched him up and given him something for the pain and infection. He will live if he rests and does not do anything stupid." Victoria sagged with relief. "Can I see him?" "He is asleep." "But yes, go sit with him." Thomas lay in her bed, bare-chested with bandages wrapped around his shoulder. In sleep, the hard edges of his face softened, and Victoria could see the younger man he must have been before life in the West had carved its marks on him. She pulled a chair beside the bed and took his hand, his skin rough against hers. "You foolish man," she whispered. "Why did you come back here instead of getting help in Barstow?" But she knew why. He had said it himself. He had needed to get back to her. Over the next several days, Victoria nursed Thomas through his recovery. Mrs. Chen taught her how to change his bandages and clean the wound, how to mix the poultices that would prevent infection. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes feverish. In his fever dreams, he talked. Victoria learned things about him she never would have known otherwise. He was from Texas originally, had been a ranger until his wife and baby daughter died of cholera 7 years ago. He had been drifting ever since, taking security jobs, never staying in one place too long. "Sarah," he mumbled once in the grip of fever. "I am sorry, so sorry." Victoria held his hand and whispered soothing words, her heart aching for his loss. On the 5th day, his fever broke. He woke up clear-eyed and weak, blinking at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Where am I?" "My room behind the general store," Victoria said. She was sitting in her chair beside the bed, where she had spent most of the last 5 days. "You have been here since you rode in half dead." Thomas tried to sit up and immediately grimaced in pain. "How long?" "5 days. You were shot, remember? Carlson ambushed you." "I remember." Thomas looked down at his bandaged shoulder. "You saved my life." "Mrs. Chen saved your life. I just sat here and worried." "That counts for something." His gray eyes found hers. "You did not have to do that." "Of course I did. After what you did for me. I owe you everything." "You do not owe me anything, Victoria. That is not why I helped you." She knew what he was going to say, could see it in his face, and suddenly she did not want to hear it. She was terrified of what it might mean, terrified of hoping for something she could not have. "You should rest," she said, standing up abruptly. "Mrs. Chen will want to check your bandages." She fled before he could respond, her heart pounding. She knew she was being a coward, but she could not help it. Everything was happening too fast, and she felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, one step away from falling. Mrs. Chen found her in the storeroom, counting inventory she had already counted twice. "You are going to wear holes in that paper the way you keep checking it," the older woman said dryly. "I am just making sure everything is accurate. You are avoiding that man in your bed." Victoria's hand stilled. "I am not. Child, I have lived a long time and seen many things. I know what it looks like when someone is falling in love and fighting it every step of the way. I barely know him. Knowing someone and loving someone are not always the same thing. Sometimes the heart sees what it wants before the head catches up." Victoria set down her pencil. "I am scared," she admitted. "Of course you are. Love is terrifying, but running from it will not make it go away." "What if he does not feel the same way?" Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow. "That man rode for days with a bullet in his shoulder just to get back to you. What do you think?" Victoria returned to her room that evening to find Thomas sitting up in bed, looking frustrated and restless. "You should not be moving so much," she said. "I have been in bed for 5 days. I am going crazy. You were shot. You need time to heal." "I will heal faster if I can move around." Thomas swung his legs over the side of the bed, wincing. He was wearing his pants but was still bare-chested, and Victoria tried not to stare at the expanse of muscled skin marked with old scars. "At least put on a shirt," she said. "Cannot reach that high yet without it pulling." He stood up carefully, steadying himself with one hand on the bedpost. "See, I am fine." He took 2 steps and swayed. Victoria rushed forward to catch him, wrapping her arms around his waist. He was solid and warm against her, and she could feel the strong beat of his heart. "You are not fine," she said. "You are stubborn and foolish and going to tear your stitches." Thomas looked down at her, and she saw something fierce and tender in his eyes. "Victoria." "What?" "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said before I left for Barstow." Her breath caught. "You do not have to." "Yes, I do. Because if Carlson had killed me, I would have died without you knowing." He lifted his good hand and cupped her face. I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and wonderful. "You cannot be," Victoria whispered. "We barely know each other." "I know enough. I know you are strong and brave and kind. I know that seeing you on your knees scrubbing that floor made me angry at the whole world for not seeing how special you are. I know that the thought of you scrubbing floors for the rest of your life, of never being seen or appreciated, made me want to change everything for you. Thomas, you do not have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. When I was bleeding out on that road, all I could think about was getting back to you, seeing you one more time." Victoria felt tears running down her cheeks. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, "and it terrifies me." Thomas smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. "It terrifies me too. What do? We figure it out, together." He bent his head and kissed her, gentle and careful. Victoria melted into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. The kiss was everything she had dreamed about in the dark of night and never admitted even to herself. It was promise and hope and the beginning of something new. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria was breathless. "You need to get back in bed. Only if you stay with me. Thomas Walker, you are in no condition for anything improper." He laughed, then winced as it pulled his shoulder. "Just stay and talk to me. I have been alone with my thoughts for 5 days. Tell me about your new job. Tell me about everything I missed." So Victoria helped him back into bed, then settled beside him, her head on his good shoulder. And she talked about working at the general store, about Mrs. Chen's dry humor, about the customers and the small dramas of Mojave. And Thomas listened, his hand playing with her hair, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria felt completely at peace. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas healed rapidly. He was young and strong, and with Victoria and Mrs. Chen looking after him, he recovered faster than expected. By the end of the 2nd week, he was back to almost full mobility, though the wound still pained him. "I need to go back to the Silver Dollar," he said one morning over breakfast in the store's small kitchen. "Henderson is probably wondering what happened to me." "He knows you were shot," Victoria said. "I sent word. Still, I have a job to do." Victoria set down her coffee cup. "Do you plan to stay in Mojave?" It was the question that had been hanging between them, unspoken but always present. Thomas's life was drifting, taking jobs wherever they came up, never putting down roots. Mojave was just another stop for him, or was it? Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. "I want to stay, if you want me to stay." "I want you to stay," Victoria said immediately, "but you should not stay just for me. You should stay because you want to be here. I want to be wherever you are." The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. Victoria turned her hand over in his, threading their fingers together. "Then stay," she said. "Build a life here with me." "Is that what you want, a life with me?" "Yes." She said it without hesitation, without doubt. 2 months ago, she had been scrubbing floors with no hope for the future. Now she was sitting across from a man who loved her, planning a life together. It felt like a dream. Thomas stood up and came around the table. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, careful of his healing shoulder. "Marry me," he said. Victoria's heart stopped. "What? Marry me, Victoria? I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I am sure about this, about you. Marry me." "Yes," Victoria breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Victoria felt like she was flying. Everything had changed so fast, her whole life turned upside down in the best possible way. She was loved. She was cherished. She was going to be married to a good man who saw her for who she really was. When they told Mrs. Chen, the older woman smiled and said, "About time. I will close the store for the wedding. Cannot have it without me there." Word spread quickly through Mojave. The scrub woman from the Silver Dollar was marrying the gunman who had run off Carlson's gang. People talked about it in the streets, in the saloon, in the general store. Some were genuinely happy for them. Others gossiped and speculated, wondering what a man like Thomas Walker saw in a girl like Victoria Barrett. Victoria tried not to let the gossip bother her. She knew the truth. Thomas loved her, and that was all that mattered. They decided to get married quickly and simply. There was no point in waiting, no families to invite or elaborate plans to make. On a sunny Saturday morning 3 weeks after Thomas's proposal, they stood in the small church at the edge of Mojave and spoke their vows. Henderson was there, surprisingly supportive, along with several of the men from the saloon. Mrs. Chen stood up as Victoria's witness, wearing her finest silk dress. The Chinese community came out in force to support Mrs. Chen's employee, and to Victoria's surprise, several of the women she had nodded to in passing over the years came up to congratulate her. The circuit preacher married them, his voice booming in the small church as he declared them man and wife. Thomas kissed her, and the assembled crowd cheered. It was perfect. Simple and honest and real, just like their love. After the ceremony, Mrs. Chen threw a party in the general store, providing food and drink for anyone who wanted to celebrate. Thomas and Victoria stood in the center of it all, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, both of them grinning like fools. "You did good," Henderson told Thomas, clapping him on the back. "She is a fine woman." "I know," Thomas said, looking down at Victoria with such love in his eyes that she felt her breath catch. That night, Thomas carried her over the threshold of the small house they had rented on the outskirts of town. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Their home. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Thomas gentle with her inexperience, Victoria eager and willing. They learned each other's bodies in the soft lamplight, taking their time, making promises with touch instead of words. Afterward, Victoria lay in Thomas's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "You are never scrubbing another floor, Mrs. Walker, I promise you that," Victoria smiled. "Well, I might scrub our floor occasionally when it gets dirty." "That does not count." "No," she agreed. "That does not count." The first months of their marriage were a period of adjustment and discovery. Thomas continued his work at the Silver Dollar, but now he came home every night to Victoria. She kept her job at the general store, enjoying the work and the independence it gave her. They settled into a comfortable routine. Thomas would wake early and make coffee while Victoria dressed for work. They would eat breakfast together, talking about the day ahead, then walk together to the main street where they would part ways with a kiss, Thomas heading to the saloon and Victoria to the store. In the evenings, they would have dinner in their small house, then sit on the front porch and watch the sun set over the desert. Those were Victoria's favorite times, when it was just the two of them and the vast expanse of the California sky. But their happiness was not without challenges. One evening, about 4 months into their marriage, Thomas came home tense and worried. "What is wrong?" Victoria asked, setting aside the shirt she was mending. "Carlson is back in the area. Word is he has been recruiting, building up his gang again, and he has been asking questions about me." Victoria felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "He is coming for revenge, most likely." Thomas sat down heavily. "I humiliated him in front of his men, cost him his protection racket in Mojave. Men like Carlson do not forget that. What do we do? I am not sure yet. But I need you to be careful. Do not go anywhere alone, especially after dark." Over the next few weeks, tension built in Mojave. Everyone knew Carlson was out there somewhere, planning something. The mood in the Silver Dollar grew subdued, and even the streets seemed quieter than usual. Thomas became more vigilant, always aware of his surroundings, his hand never far from his gun. Victoria hated seeing him like this, coiled tight with expectation of violence. The confrontation came on a Tuesday afternoon. Victoria was at the general store, helping Mrs. Chen with inventory when they heard shouting in the street. She ran to the window and saw Carlson and his men riding into town, at least 10 of them this time, all armed. "Thomas," she breathed. She ran out of the store before Mrs. Chen could stop her, her skirts flying, her heart in her throat. She had to get to Thomas, had to warn him. But Thomas was already in the street, standing alone in front of the Silver Dollar. He had seen the riders coming and met them head-on. "Walker," Carlson roared. His hand had healed, but Victoria could see it was twisted, permanently damaged from Thomas's shot. "Time to finish this. You are outnumbered, Carlson," someone called from the crowd gathering on the sidewalks. 10 against 1. That is not a fair fight." "Fair does not enter into it," Carlson snarled. "Then let me even the odds," a new voice said. Victoria turned to see Henderson stepping into the street, a shotgun in his hands. Then another man joined him, one of the miners who frequented the saloon. Then another and another. Within minutes, a dozen men from Mojave stood in the street with Thomas, all armed, all ready to fight. "Seems like it is a fair fight after all," Thomas said calmly. Carlson looked around, his face purpling with rage. He was outnumbered now, and he knew it. His men were shifting nervously, realizing they had walked into a trap. "This is not over, Walker," Carlson spat. "Yes, it is," Thomas said. "You can ride out now and never come back, or you can try your luck and see how many of you make it out of Mojave alive. Your choice." The standoff stretched out, tense seconds ticking by. Victoria held her breath, certain bullets were about to fly. Then Carlson yanked on his reins, wheeling his horse around. "Let's go," he snarled at his men. They rode out of town at a gallop, dust rising behind them. The men in the street lowered their weapons and a cheer went up. Victoria ran to Thomas, throwing herself into his arms. He caught her, holding her tight. "You were going to fight them all," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I was going to do whatever it took to keep you safe." "We were going to do whatever it took," Henderson corrected, coming over to clap Thomas on the shoulder. "You are one of us now, Walker. We look after our own." That night, as Victoria and Thomas lay in bed, she said, "I thought I was going to lose you today." "You are not getting rid of me that easily," Thomas said, pulling her closer. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that we will grow old together, that we will have years and years of boring, peaceful days with no gunfights or outlaws or danger." Thomas kissed her forehead. "I promise. From now on, the most exciting thing in our lives will be what Mrs. Chen has on sale at the store." Victoria laughed, the tension finally draining from her body. "I can live with that. Me too." The months turned into a year, then 2. Carlson never came back to Mojave, and eventually word filtered back that he had been killed in a shootout in Arizona. Thomas's injury healed completely, though he would always carry the scar. And life in their small house settled into a comfortable, happy rhythm. Victoria found she loved being married, loved having someone to come home to, loved the small intimacies of daily life with Thomas. He was a good husband, attentive and loving, always thinking of her needs before his own. When she discovered she was pregnant, 2 years into their marriage, Thomas was overjoyed. He fussed over her constantly, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a teacup. Victoria found it simultaneously sweet and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him when he tried to prevent her from sweeping the floor. "I know, but I want to take care of you. You are taking care of me, but I can still do normal things. Their son was born on a warm spring day in 1886, a healthy baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after Thomas's father. Holding her newborn son, Victoria reflected on how much her life had changed. 3 years ago, she had been on her knees scrubbing floors, invisible and hopeless. Now she was a wife and mother, loved and cherished, with a home and a family of her own. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked. He was sitting beside the bed, unable to take his eyes off his son. "About the day you walked into the Silver Dollar," Victoria said. "About how you changed everything." "We changed everything," Thomas corrected. "Together. You told me I would never scrub another floor, and you have not." "I have scrubbed plenty of floors, just my own." Thomas laughed. "That does not count, and you know it." Baby Samuel made a small noise, and they both looked down at him, marveling at the tiny person they had created together. "He is perfect," Victoria whispered. "He is," Thomas agreed. "Just like his mother. Life with a baby was exhausting but wonderful." Samuel was a good child, healthy and happy, and Victoria loved every moment of motherhood, even the sleepless nights and the constant worry. Thomas was a devoted father, spending hours just holding his son, talking to him, making plans for their future. Mrs. Chen doted on the baby, constantly bringing over little gifts and offering advice. The Chinese community embraced the Walker family, and Victoria found herself with more friends than she had ever had in her life. Thomas eventually left his job at the Silver Dollar and took a position as deputy sheriff for the county. It was steady work with decent pay, and more importantly, it was legal and relatively safe. He was good at the job, his natural authority and quick thinking making him perfect for law enforcement. When Samuel was 2, Victoria became pregnant again. Their daughter, Emma, was born in the fall of 1888, a tiny, delicate baby with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination. Their little house was bursting at the seams now with 2 children, so Thomas and Victoria started looking for a bigger place. They found a small ranch just outside Mojave, nothing fancy but with good land and a solid house. Thomas took out a loan and they moved in on Samuel's 3rd birthday. Victoria loved the ranch. She planted a garden, kept chickens, and learned to can and preserve food for the winter. It was hard work, but it was her work, done for her family in her own home. She thought sometimes about the girl she had been, scrubbing floors in the Silver Dollar, and could hardly believe that was the same person she was now. The years continued to pass, marked by small joys and occasional sorrows. They lost a baby between Emma and their 3rd child, a miscarriage that devastated them both. But they held each other through the grief and eventually were blessed with another son, James, born in 1891. Thomas's work as deputy kept him busy, but he always made time for his family. He taught Samuel to ride, played dolls with Emma, and walked baby James for hours when he was fussy. He was everything Victoria could have hoped for in a husband and father. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Victoria into town for dinner at the new hotel restaurant. It was a rare night out, just the 2 of them, Mrs. Chen watching the children. 10 years, Thomas said, raising his glass of wine. Has it been everything you hoped for? Victoria thought about it, about the life they had built together, about their children sleeping safely at home, about the love that had only grown deeper over the years. It has been better, she said. So much better than I ever imagined. You have made me happier than I ever thought I could be, Thomas said. After Sarah and the baby died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I would just drift forever, never putting down roots, never risking my heart again. And then I walked into that saloon and saw you. And told me I would never scrub another floor, Victoria finished, smiling at the memory, and meant it. Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. I love you, Victoria Walker, more than I did 10 years ago, more than I did yesterday, more than I did this morning. I love you too." She squeezed his hand, her heart full. "Thank you for seeing me, for seeing past the scrub woman to who I really was. That was easy. You have always been extraordinary." They stayed at the hotel that night, a special treat, making love in the comfortable bed and falling asleep in each other's arms. In the morning, they walked home together through the early sunlight, hand in hand, still as in love as they had been on their wedding day. Life continued its steady march forward. Samuel grew tall and serious, helping his father around the ranch. Emma was bright and curious, always asking questions. James was the wild one, constantly getting into trouble and keeping Victoria on her toes. When Victoria turned 40, she thought she was done having babies. They had 3 healthy children and a good life. But apparently fate had other plans, because at 41 she found herself pregnant once more. "Are you sure?" Thomas asked when she told him. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, their favorite time of day. The doctor confirmed it today. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then he started laughing. "Well, we will need to add on to the house. Are you upset?" "Upset? Victoria, I am thrilled. Another baby, another person to love. How could I be upset?" Their 4th child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in 1898. By then, Samuel was almost 16, Emma was 10, and James was 7. They doted on their baby sister, and Rose was the most spoiled baby Victoria had ever seen. "She is going to be impossible when she is older," Victoria told Thomas one evening as they watched Emma and Samuel fighting over who got to hold the baby. "Probably," Thomas agreed, "but we will love her anyway." As the new century dawned, Victoria and Thomas found themselves entering a new phase of life. Samuel was grown now, working as a ranch hand on a spread near Barstow. Emma was a young woman, teaching at the school in Mojave. James was talking about joining the army, and Rose was a precocious toddler who ruled the house with an iron fist. "Can you believe it has been almost 20 years?" Victoria asked one night. They were in bed, Rose finally asleep after a long bedtime battle. 20 years since I walked into the Silver Dollar. 20 years since you changed my life." "We changed each other's lives," Thomas said. He was graying now at the temples and there were lines around his eyes, but to Victoria, he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "Do you ever regret it, settling down, tying yourself to one place?" "Never, not once." Thomas pulled her close. "You are my home, Victoria. Wherever you are, that is where I belong. Even when I am old and gray, especially then." Victoria smiled and kissed him, still feeling that flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time he looked at her. Some things never changed. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges. Samuel married a nice girl from Barstow and gave them their first grandchild, a boy named Thomas after his grandfather. Emma surprised everyone by running off to San Francisco to pursue her dream of being a writer. James did join the army and was stationed in the Philippines. And Rose grew into a beautiful young woman who kept them all on their toes with her spirited personality. Through it all, Victoria and Thomas remained each other's constants. They weathered storms together, celebrated victories together, and grew old together, just as Victoria had asked him to promise all those years ago. On the morning of their 30th wedding anniversary, Victoria woke to find Thomas already awake, watching her with that familiar look of love in his eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Walker," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Walker. 30 years. Can you believe it?" "Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It feels like just yesterday we were standing in that little church, saying our vows. And sometimes it feels like I have known you my whole life." Thomas reached out and tucked a strand of gray hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly familiar. He had been doing it for 30 years, and it still made her heart skip. "You remember what you said to me. That first time we really talked, I told you that you would never scrub another floor. And I have not. Not like that, anyway. Not on my knees for pennies, invisible and forgotten." "You were never invisible to me," Thomas said softly. "From the very first moment I saw you." They got up and dressed, moving through their morning routine with the ease of 3 decades of practice. Their house was quieter now, with most of the children gone, but it still felt full of life and love. That afternoon, their family gathered for a celebration. Samuel came with his wife and 3 children. Emma took the train from San Francisco. James was still overseas, but he sent a telegram of congratulations. And Rose, now 17 and stunning, helped set the table and organize everything. As Victoria looked around at her family, at the children and grandchildren gathered in her home, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. All of this had come from one moment, one act of kindness, one man who saw her and decided to change her life. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked quietly, coming up beside her. "That I am the luckiest woman in the world. I am the lucky one. We are both lucky." Thomas wrapped his arm around her waist and kissed her temple. "Yes, we are." The celebration went late into the evening, filled with laughter and stories, good food and better company. When everyone had finally left and Rose had gone to bed, Victoria and Thomas sat on their porch, just as they had done thousands of times before. "It has been a good life," Victoria said, leaning her head on Thomas's shoulder. "The best life. You think we have many more years?" "I plan on at least 30 more," Thomas said. "I am not done with you yet, Victoria Walker," she smiled. "Good. I am not done with you either." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the desert. The same stars that had watched over them when they first met, when Thomas had walked into the Silver Dollar and seen a woman scrubbing floors and decided to change her destiny. "Thomas." "Yes, love. Thank you. For what? For everything. For seeing me. For loving me. For giving me this life." Thomas turned to her and cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with those gray eyes that had first captured her heart so long ago. "You do not have to thank me," he said. "Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." He kissed her, tender and sweet, a kiss that held 30 years of love and commitment and partnership. And Victoria kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude into it, knowing that this was what happiness looked like. This was what it meant to be truly seen, truly loved, truly cherished. They did not scrub floors anymore, either of them. They had built a life together, raised a family, loved each other through joys and sorrows, and grown old side by side. And every day, Victoria woke up grateful for that moment in the Silver Dollar when a cowboy had looked at a scrub woman and seen not what she was, but what she could be. Thomas kept his promise. She never scrubbed another floor for money, never went back to being invisible and forgotten. Instead, she had lived a life full of love and meaning, a life she had built with the man who had given her back her dignity and her hope. As they sat on the porch that night, wrapped in each other's arms, Victoria thought about the girl she had been at 22, beaten down by life, her hands raw and her spirit nearly broken. If she could go back and tell that girl what the future held, she would say this: "Hold on. Help is coming. Love is coming. A tall cowboy with gray eyes is going to walk into that saloon and change everything. And your life, which seems so dark and hopeless right now, is going to be beautiful beyond your wildest dreams." But she could not go back. She could only move forward day by day, hand in hand with the man she loved. And that was enough. That was everything. The years continued to pass, gentle and sweet. Victoria and Thomas watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated births and mourned deaths, and held fast to each other through it all. Samuel took over the ranch, expanding it into a successful operation. Emma published her first novel, dedicating it to her parents. James came home from the army and settled in Mojave with a wife he had met in California. And Rose, their baby, became a teacher like her sister before her. When Victoria turned 60, her children threw her a surprise party. The whole town came, it seemed, crowding into the ranch house and spilling out into the yard. As she looked around at all the faces, some old friends, some new, she was struck by how much her life had changed. "You all right?" Thomas asked, noticing her distant expression. "More than all right. I was just thinking about Mrs. Chen. I wish she were here to see this." Mrs. Chen had passed away 5 years earlier, at the remarkable age of 93. She had been like a mother to Victoria, teaching her about business and life and the strength that comes from within. Victoria still missed her every day. "She would be proud of you," Thomas said. "Look at what you have built. Look at this family, this community." "We built it," Victoria corrected. "Together." At 70, Thomas finally retired from his position as deputy sheriff. He had served for over 30 years, becoming sheriff in the last decade. The town gave him a gold watch and a ceremony, and Thomas gave a speech that made Victoria cry. "I came to Mojave as a drifter," he said, looking out at the assembled crowd. "A man with no roots and no plans beyond the next job. But this town gave me everything. It gave me purpose, it gave me a home, and most importantly, it gave me my wife. Everything good in my life started here, in this dusty railroad town in the middle of the desert. And I would not trade it for anything in the world." They spent their retirement years working the ranch, now mostly run by Samuel, but still needing their experienced hands. Victoria tended her garden, which had grown to include a small orchard. Thomas trained horses, a skill he had picked up in his youth and never lost. And every evening, without fail, they sat on their porch and watched the sunset. When Victoria turned 75, she was surrounded by 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. It was a legacy beyond anything she could have imagined when she was that young woman scrubbing floors. "You think about it much anymore?" Emma asked her one afternoon. They were sitting in the garden, snapping peas while Rose's children played nearby. "About before Dad." Victoria thought about it. "Not often. That life feels like it belonged to someone else. But when I do think about it, I am reminded how grateful I am, how one person, one act of kindness can change everything. He saved you, and I saved him. He told me once that after his first wife and baby died, he thought he would never be happy again. But we found each other, and we built this life. We saved each other." Emma smiled. "You too are going to be one of those couples who die on the same day, are you not? Too devoted to live without each other." "I hope not. I do not want him to be alone, but I also do not want to be without him." Victoria paused in her work. "Is that selfish?" "No, Mama, that is love." Victoria and Thomas's 80th birthdays came within months of each other. The family threw them a joint party, and the celebration was enormous. 3 generations gathered to honor the couple who had built this family from nothing, who had loved each other faithfully for over 50 years. 53 years, Thomas said in his speech, his voice still strong despite his age. "That is how long I have been married to this remarkable woman, and I would gladly live 53 more if God granted me the time. Victoria Walker, you are the love of my life, my partner, my best friend. Everything good about me comes from you." Victoria cried, as did most of the women in the room. Thomas came and took her hand, and they danced slowly to music played by their grandson, Emma's boy who had a talent for the fiddle. "I love you," Victoria whispered as they swayed together. I love you too. Never stopped, never will. As they moved into their 80s, life slowed down naturally. Thomas's joints hurt more, and Victoria's eyesight was not what it used to be. But they adapted, helping each other with the things that became difficult, never complaining about the march of time. Samuel and his family moved into the ranch house with them, taking over the day-to-day operations entirely now. Victoria did not mind. It was nice to have the house full of life again, to hear children's laughter in the halls. On a warm spring evening, almost 57 years after their wedding day, Victoria and Thomas sat on their porch as usual. Thomas had been quieter than normal that day, and Victoria sensed he had something on his mind. "What is it?" she finally asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have been thinking about that day. The day I walked into the Silver Dollar and saw you scrubbing that floor." "What about it? If I had walked in 10 minutes earlier or 10 minutes later, I might have missed you. We might never have met. Our whole life together hinged on that moment, on that exact timing." Victoria squeezed his hand. "But you did walk in at exactly the right moment, and we did meet. And we did build this life together. Do you believe in fate? I believe that some things are meant to be. I believe that you and I were meant to find each other, meant to love each other, meant to create this family and this life." Thomas lifted her hand and kissed it, a gesture he had done thousands of times over the decades. "I am so glad I walked through that door. Me too, my love. Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the desert they had called home for so many years. The same desert that had witnessed their courtship, their marriage, the births of their children, and all the joys and sorrows of a long life lived together. Victoria: "Yes, Thomas. If I could go back and do it all over again, I would not change a single thing." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Neither would I. Not even the hard parts, not even the hard parts. They made us who we are." Thomas nodded, satisfied. They continued to sit, the evening growing dark around them, neither wanting to move, both content to be exactly where they were. Victoria thought about that young woman she had been, on her knees with a scrub brush, hopeless and invisible. She thought about how Thomas had walked in and seen her, really seen her, when no one else did. She thought about his promise that she would never scrub another floor, and how he had kept that promise in every way that mattered. She had scrubbed her own floors over the years, of course. Had cleaned her own house, raised her own children, built her own life. But she had done it with dignity, with choice, with love. She had done it as a woman who was valued and cherished, not as someone invisible and forgotten. Thomas had given her that. But she had also given him something equally precious. She had given him a reason to stop drifting, to put down roots, to build a life again after tragedy. They had healed each other's wounds and built something beautiful from their individual pain. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Victoria leaned her head on Thomas's shoulder, just as she had done countless times before. He wrapped his arm around her and they sat together, two people who had become one over the course of a lifetime. "I love you," Victoria whispered. "I love you too," Thomas replied. "Always have, always will." And in that moment, sitting on the porch of the ranch they had built together, surrounded by the love of family and the peace of a life well lived, Victoria knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. With the man who had promised she would never scrub another floor, and who had spent 57 years proving that some promises are kept not just once, but every single day. The story of Victoria and Thomas Walker became legend in Mojave. Their children told it to their grandchildren, who told it to their own children. It became a story about love and second chances, about seeing the worth in someone when the world has decided they have none, about building a life from nothing and making it something beautiful. Long after both Victoria and Thomas were gone, laid to rest side by side in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Mojave, their story lived on. It became the kind of story people told when they needed hope, when they needed to believe that life could change in an instant, that love could save you, that tomorrow could be better than today. And in the Walker family, passed down through generations, was a tradition. Every time someone in the family got married, they would tell the story of Victoria and Thomas. They would tell how a cowboy walked into a saloon and saw a woman scrubbing floors, how he looked at her and saw not what she was in that moment, but what she could be, how he promised she would never scrub another floor, and how he kept that promise for 57 years, how they loved each other through poverty and prosperity, through joy and sorrow, through the easy times and the hard ones. And then, as the new couple began their own journey together, someone would always say, "May your love be as true as Thomas and Victoria's. May you see each other as clearly as they did, and may you build a life together that will be told about for generations to come." It was a blessing and a challenge, a reminder that love is not just about the grand gestures but about the daily choice to see your partner, to value them, to cherish them. It was about keeping your promises, not just once but every day for a lifetime. The old ranch house still stood, now kept by Victoria and Thomas's great-great-grandchildren. The porch, where they had spent so many evenings, still looked out over the desert. And sometimes, on warm spring evenings when the light was just right, people swore they could see two figures sitting there, side by side, watching the sunset together, still in love after all these years. Whether it was a trick of the light or something more, no one could say. But the people of Mojave like to think that some love stories are so powerful, so true, that they echo through time itself. That somewhere, somehow, Thomas and Victoria were still sitting on that porch, still holding hands, still grateful for the day a drifting cowboy walked into a saloon and told a scrub woman she would never have to scrub again. And she never did.